92nd Street Y online media is made possible by the generous support of listeners like you. This program, part of the Unterberg Poetry Center's 75 at 75 project, features Vladimir Nabokov reading from his work. It was recorded on April 5th, 1964, before a live audience at New York's 92nd Street Y.
I shall begin by reciting the ballad of Longwood Glenn, which is a short poem I composed in Wyoming, one of my favorite states of existence. It is also one of my favorite ballads. That Sunday morning at 10:30, 2 cars crossed the creek and entered the glen. In the first was Art Longwood, a local florist, with his children and wife, now Mrs. DeForest. In the one that followed, a ranger saw Art's father, stepfather, and father-in-law. These 3 old men walked off to the cove. Through tinkling weeds, Art slowly drove. Fair was the morning with bright clouds afar. Children and comics emerged from the car. Silent Art, who could stare at a thing all day, watched a bug climb a stalk and fly away. Pauline had asthma, Paul used a crutch. They were cute little rascals, but could not run much. I wish, said his mother to crippled Paul, some man would teach you to pitch that ball. Silent Art took the ball and tossed it high. It stuck in a tree that was passing by. And the grave green pilgrim turned and stopped. The children waited, but no ball dropped. I never climbed trees in my timid prime, thought Art, and forthwith started to climb. Now and then his elbow or knee could be seen in a jigsaw puzzle of blue and green. Up and up Art Longwood swarmed and shinned, and the leaves said yes to the questioning wind. What tiaras of gardens, what torrents of light, how accessible ether, how easy flight. His family circled the tree all day. Pauline concluded, Dad climbed away. None saw the delirious celestial crowds greet the hero from earth in the snow of the clouds. Mrs. Longwood was getting a little concerned. He never came down. He never returned. She found some change at the foot of the tree. The children grew bored. Paul was stung by a bee. The old men walked over and stood looking up, each holding 5 cards and a paper cup. Cars on the highway stopped, backed, and then up a rutted road waddled into the glen. And the tree was suddenly full of noise. Conventioners, fishermen, freckled boys, anacondas and pumas were mentioned by some, and all kinds of humans continued to come. Tree surgeons, detectives, the fire brigade, an ambulance parked in the dancing shade. A drunken rogue with a rope and a gun arrived on the scene to see justice done. Explorers, dendrologists, all were there, and a strange pale girl with gypsy hair. And from Cape Fear to Cape Flattery, every paper had man lost in tree. And the sky-bound oak where owls had perched and the moon dripped gold, was felled and searched. They discovered some inchworms, a red-cheeked gull, and an ancient nest with a new-laid ball. They varnished the stump, put up railings and signs, restrooms nestled in roses and vines. Mrs. Longwood, retouched when the children died, became a photographer's dreamy bride. And now the De Forests, with 4 old men, like regular tourists, visit the Glen, munch their lunches, look up and down, wash their hands, and drive back to town. I shall now read a passage from Pale Fire, describing the narrator's friendship with the poet Shade. For those who committed the grave mistake of not reading my novel, I should add that both my poet and my speaker are invented characters. Never shall I forget how elated I was upon learning that this suburban house rented for my use from Judge Galsworth, who had gone on his sabbatical to England, into which I moved on February 5, 1959, stood next to that of the celebrated American poet whose verses I had tried to put into Zemblin 2 decades earlier. Apart from this glamorous neighborhood, the Galsworthian chateau, as I was soon to discover, had little to recommend it. The heating system was a farce, depending as it did on registers in the floor, where from the tepid exhalations of a throbbing and groaning basement furnace were transmitted to the rooms with the faintness of a moribund's last breath. By occluding the apertures upstairs, I attempted to give more energy to the register in the living room, but its climate proved to be incurably vitiated by there being nothing between it and the Arctic regions save a sleazy front door without a vestige of vestibule, either because the house had been built in midsummer by a naive settler who could not imagine the kind of winter that New Wye had in store for him, or because old-time gentility required that a chance caller at the open door could satisfy himself from the threshold that nothing unseemly was going on in the parlor. February and March in Zembla used to be pretty rough too, but even a peasant's room presented a solid of uniform warmth, not a reticulation of deadly draughts. It is true that, as usually happens to newcomers, I was told I had chosen the worst winter in years, and this at the latitude of Palermo. On one of my first mornings there, as I was preparing to leave for college in the powerful red car I had just acquired, I noticed that Mr. and Mrs. Shade, neither of whom I had yet met socially — I was to learn later that they assumed I wished to be left alone — were having trouble with their old Packard in the slippery driveway, where it or she emitted whines of agony but could not extricate one tortured rear wheel out of a concave inferno of ice. John Shade busied himself clumsily with a bucket, from which, with the gestures of a sower, he distributed handfuls of brown sand over the blue glaze. He wore snow boots, his vicuña collar was up, His abundant grey hair looked begrimed in the sun. I knew he had been ill a few months before, and thinking to offer my neighbors a ride to the campus in my powerful machine, I hurried out towards them. A lane curving around the slight eminence on which my rented castle stood separated it from my neighbor's driveway, and I was about to cross that lane when I lost my footing and sat down on the surprisingly hard snow. My fall acted as a chemical reagent on the Shade's sedan, which forthwith budged and almost ran over me as it swung into the lane, with John at the wheel, strenuously grimacing, and Sebald fiercely talking into him. I'm not sure either saw me. A few days later, however, I was introduced to the old poet at lunchtime in the faculty club. At last presented credentials, as noted a little ironically in my agenda. I was invited to join him and 4 or 5 other eminent professors at his usual table under an enlarged photograph of Wordsmith College, as it was, stunned and shabby, on a remarkably gloomy summer day in 1903. His laconic suggestion that I try the pork amused me. I am a strict vegetarian, and I like to cook my own meals. Consuming something that had been handled by a fellow creature was, I explained to the rubicund convives, as repulsive to me as eating any creature, and that would include, lowering my voice, the pulpous ponytailed girl student who served us and licked her pencil. Moreover, I had already finished the fruit brought with me in my briefcase, so I would content myself, I said, with a bottle of good college ale. My free and simple demeanor set everybody at ease. The usual questions were fired at me about eggnogs and milkshakes being or not being acceptable to one of my persuasion. Shade said that with him it was the other way round. He must make a definite effort to partake of a vegetable. Beginning a salad was to him like stepping into seawater on a chilly day. And he had always to brace himself in order to attack the fortress of an apple. I was not yet used to the rather fatiguing jesting and teasing that goes on among American intellectuals of the inbreeding academic type, and so abstained from telling John Shade in front of all those grinning old males how much I admired his work. Instead, I asked him about one of my newly acquired students who also attended his course, a moody, delicate, a rather wonderful boy. But with a resolute shake of his hoary forelock, the old poet answered that he had ceased long ago to memorize faces and names of students, and that the only person in his poetry class whom he could visualize was an extramural lady on crutches. Come, said Professor Hurley. Do you mean, John, you really don't have a mental or visceral picture of that stunning blonde in the black leotard who haunts Lit 202? Shade, all his wrinkles beaming, benignly tapped Hurley on the wrist to make him stop. Another tormentor inquired if it was true that I had installed 2 ping-pong tables in my basement. I asked, was it a crime? No, he said, but why 2? Is that a crime? I countered, and they all laughed. Despite a wobbly heart, a slight limp, and a certain curious contortion in his method of progress, Shade had an inordinate liking for long walks. But the snow bothered him, and he preferred in winter to have his wife call for him after classes with the car. A few days later, as I was about to leave Main Hall, now Shade Hall, alas, I saw him waiting outside for Mrs. Shade to fetch him. I stood beside him for a minute on the steps of the pillared porch while pulling my gloves on finger by finger and looking away as if waiting to review a regiment. That was a thorough job, commented the poet. He consulted his wristwatch. A snowflake settled upon it. Crystal to crystal, said Shade. I offered to take him home in my powerful Cromler. Wives, Mr. Shade, are forgetful. He cocked his shaggy head to look at the library clock. Across the bleak expanse of snow-covered turf, two radiant lads in colorful winter clothes passed, laughing and sliding. Shade glanced at his watch again and with a shrug accepted my offer. I wanted to know if he did not mind being taken the longer way, with a stop at community center where I wanted to buy some chocolate-coated cookies and a little caviar. He said it was fine with him. From the inside of the supermarket, through a plate glass window, I saw the old chap pop into a liquor store. When I returned with my purchases, he was back in the car, reading a tabloid newspaper which I had thought no poet would deign to touch. A comfortable burp told me he had a flask of brandy concealed about his warmly coated person. As we turned into the driveway of his house, we saw Sebald pulling up in front of it. I got out with courteous vivacity. She said, "Since my husband doesn't believe in introducing people, let us do it ourselves. You are Dr. Kinbote, aren't you? And I am Sybil Shade." Then she addressed her husband, saying he might have waited in his office another minute. She had honked and called and walked all the way up, etc. I turned to go, not wishing to listen to a marital scene, but she called me back. "Have a drink with us," she said, "or rather with me, because John is forbidden to touch alcohol." I explained I could not stay long, as I was about to have a kind of little seminar at home, followed by some table tennis with two charming identical twins and another boy. Henceforth, I began seeing more and more of my celebrated neighbor. The view from one of my windows kept providing me with first-rate entertainment, especially when I was on the wait for some tardy guest. From the second story of my house, the Shade's living room window remained clearly visible so long as the branches of the trees between us were still bare. And almost every evening I could see the poet's slippered foot gently rocking. One inferred from it that he was sitting with a book in a low chair, but one never managed to glimpse more than that foot and its shadow moving up and down to the secret rhythm of mental absorption in the concentrated lamplight. Always at the same time, the brown Morocco slipper would drop from the wool-socked foot, which continued to oscillate, with, however, a slight slackening of pace. One knew that bedtime was closing in, that in a few minutes the toe would prod and worry the slipper and then disappear with it from my golden field of vision, traversed by the black bendlet of a branch. And sometimes Sybil Shade would trip by with the velocity and swinging arms of one flancing out in a fit of temper, and would return a little later at a much slower gait, having, as it were, pardoned her husband for his friendship with an eccentric neighbor. But the riddle of her behavior was entirely solved one night when, by dialing their number and watching their window at the same time, I magically induced her to go through the hasty and quite innocent emotions that had puzzled me. Alas, My peace of mind was soon to be shattered. The thick venom of envy began squirting at me as soon as academic suburbia realized that John Shade valued my society above that of all other people. Your snicker, my dear Mrs. C., did not escape our notice as I was helping the tired old poet to find his galoshes after that dreary get-together party at your house. One day, I happened to enter the English literature office in quest of a magazine with the picture of the Royal Palace in On Harbour, which I wanted my friend to see, when I overheard a young instructor in a green velvet jacket, whom I shall mercifully call Gerald Emerald, carelessly saying in answer to something the secretary had asked, "I guess Mr. Shade has already left with the great beaver. Of course, I'm quite tall, and my brown beard is of a rather rich tint and texture." The silly cognomen evidently applied to me, but was not worth noticing. And after calmly taking the magazine from a pamphlet-cluttered table, I contented myself on my way out with pulling Gerald Emerald's bow tie loose with a deft jerk of my fingers as I passed by him. There was also the morning when Dr. Natoch Dag, head of the department to which I was attached, begged me in a formal voice to be seated, then closed the door, and having regained with a downcast frown his swivel chair, urged me to be more careful. In what sense careful? A boy had complained to his advisor. Complained of what, good Lord? That I had criticized a literature course he attended, a ridiculous survey of ridiculous works conducted by a ridiculous mediocrity. Laughing in sheer relief, I embraced my good Natochka, telling him I would never be naughty again. I take this opportunity to salute him. He always behaved with such exquisite courtesy towards me that I sometimes wondered if he did not suspect what Shade suspected, and what only 3 people, 2 trustees and the president of the college, definitely knew. Oh, there were many such incidents. In a skit performed by a group of drama students, I was pictured as a pompous woman-hater with a German accent, constantly quoting Haussmann and nibbling raw carrots. And a week before Shade's death, a certain ferocious lady at whose club I had refused to speak on the subject of the Holy Volley, as she put it, confusing Auden's Hall with the title of a Finnish epic, said to me in the middle of a grocery store, "You are a remarkably disagreeable person. I fail to see how John and Sebald can stand you." And exasperated by my polite smile, she added, "What's more, you are insane." But let me not pursue the tabulation of nonsense. Whatever was thought, whatever was said, I had my full reward in John's friendship. This friendship was the more precious for its tenderness being intentionally concealed by that gruffness which stems from what can be termed the dignity of the heart. His whole being constituted a mask. John Shade's physical appearance was so little in keeping with the harmonies hiving in the man that one felt inclined to dismiss it as a coarse disguise or passing fashion. For if the fashions of the Romantic age subtilized a poet's manliness by baring his attractive neck, pruning his profile, and reflecting a mountain lake in his oval gaze, present-day bards, owing perhaps to better opportunities of aging, look like gorillas or vultures. My sublime neighbor's face had something about it that might have appealed to the eye had it been only leonine or only Iroquoian. But unfortunately, by combining the two, it merely reminded one of a fleshy Hogarthian tippler of indeterminate sex. His misshapen body, that grey mop of abundant hair, the yellow nails of his pudgy fingers, the bags under his lustreless eyes, were only intelligible if regarded as the waste products eliminated from his intrinsic self by the same forces of perfection which purified and chiseled his verse. He was his own consolation. I would like now to give an example of Shade's poetry. That is a passage of about 200 lines from his poem, which is also called Pale Fire, and where he's speaking of his dead daughter. She might have been you, me, or some quaint blend. Nature chose me so as to wrench and rend your heart and mine. At first we'd smile and say, all little girls are plump, or Jim McVeigh, the family oculist, will cure that slight squint in no time. And later, she'll be quite pretty, you know. And trying to assuage this swelling torment, that's the awkward age. She should take riding lessons, you would say, your eyes and mine not meeting. She should play tennis or badminton, less starch, more fruit. She may not be a beauty, but she's cute. It was no use. The prizes won in French and history no doubt were fun. At Christmas parties, games were rough, no doubt, and one shy little guest might be left out. But let's be fair, while children of her age were cast as elves and fairies on the stage that she'd help paint for the school pantomime, my gentle girl appeared as Mother Time, a bent charwoman with slop pail and broom, and like a fool I sobbed in the men's room. Another winter was scrape-scooped away. The tooth-wort white haunted our woods in May. Summer was power mode and autumn burned. Alas, the dingy cygnet never turned into a wood duck. And again your voice, but this is prejudice. You should rejoice that she is innocent. Why overstress the physical? She wants to look a mess. Virgins have written some resplendid books. Love-making is not everything. Good looks are not that indispensable. And still, old Pan would call from every painted hill, and still the demons of our pity spoke. No lips would share the lipstick of her smoke. The telephone that rang before a ball every 2 minutes in Sorosa Hall for her would never ring, and with a great screeching of tires on gravel to the gate out of the lacquered night, a white-scarfed beau would never come for her. She'd never go, a dream of gauze and jasmine, to that dance. We sent her, though, to a chateau in France, and she returned in tears with new defeats, new miseries. On days when all the streets of College Town led to the game, she'd sit on the library steps and read or knit. Mostly alone she'd be, or with that nice frail roommate, now a nun. and once or twice with a Korean boy who took my course. She had strange fears, strange fantasies, strange force of characters, as when she spent 3 nights investigating certain sounds and lights in an old barn. She turned back words, pot, top, spider, redips, and powder was red wop. She called you a didactic katydid. She hardly ever smiled, and when she did, it was a sign of pain. She'd criticize ferociously our projects, and with eyes expressionless, sit on her tumbled bed, spreading her swollen feet, scratching her head with psoriatic fingernails, and moan, murmuring dreadful words in monotone. She was my darling, difficult, morose, but still my darling. You remember those almost unruffled evenings when we played mahjong, or she tried on your furs, which made her almost fetching, and the mirrors smiled, the lights were merciful, the shadows mild. Sometimes I'd help her with a Latin text, or she'd be reading in her bedroom next to my fluorescent lair, and you would be in your study twice removed from me, and I would hear both voices now and then. Mother, what's grimpen? What is what? Grimpen. Pause, and your guarded scholium. Then again, Mother, what's ctonic? That too you'd explain. Appending, would you like a tangerine? No, yes. And what does sempiternal mean? You'd hesitate, and lustily I'd draw the answer from my desk through the closed door. It does not matter what it was she read. Some phony modern poem that was said in English lit to be a document engagé and compelling. What this meant, nobody cared. The point is that the 3 chambers, then bound by you and her and me, now form a triptych or a 3-act play in which portrayed events forever stay. I think she always nursed a small mad hope. I'd finished recently my book on Pope. Jane Dean, my typist, offered her one day to meet Pete Dean, a cousin. Jane's fiancé would then take all of them in his new car a score of miles to a Hawaiian bar. The boy was picked up at 8:15 in New Wye. Sleet glazed the roads. At last they found the place, when suddenly Pete Dean, clutching his brow, exclaimed that he had clean forgotten an appointment with a chum who'd land in jail if he, Pete, did not come, etc. She said she understood. After he'd gone, the 3 young people stood before the Asia entrance for a while. Puddles were neon barred, and with a smile she said she'd be de trop. She'd much prefer just going home. Her friends escorted her to the bus stop and left. But she, instead of riding home, got off at Lockenhead. You scrutinized your wrist. It's 8:15, and here time forked. I'll turn it on. The screen in its blank broth evolved a lifelike blur, and music welled. He took one look at her, my daughter, and shot a death ray at well-meaning Jane. A male hand traced from Florida to Maine the curving arrows of Aeolian wars. You said that later a quartet of bores, 2 writers and 2 critics, would debate the course of poetry on Channel 8. A nymph came pirouetting under white rotating petals in a vernal rite to kneel before an altar in a wood where various articles of toilet stood. I went upstairs and read a galley proof, and heard the wind roll marbles on the roof. See the blind beggar dance, the cripple sing, has unmistakably the vulgar ring of its preposterous age. Then came your call, my tender mockingbird, up from the hall. I was in time to overhear brief fame and have a cup of tea with you. My name was mentioned twice, as usual, just behind one oozy footstep, Frost. Sure you don't mind? I'll catch the Exton plane, because you know if I don't come by midnight with the dough. Was that the telephone? You listened at the door, nothing. Picked up the program from the floor. More headlights in the fog. There was no sense in window rubbing, only some white fence and the reflector poles passed by unmasked. Are we quite sure she's acting right, you asked? It's technically a blind date, of course. Well, shall we try the preview of Remorse? And we allowed in all tranquility the famous film to spread its charmed marquee. The famous face flowed in, fair and inane, the parted lips, the swimming eyes, the grain of beauty on the cheek, odd Gallicism, and the soft form dissolving in the prism of corporate desire. I think she said, I'll get off here. It's only Lockenhead. Yes, that's okay. Gripping the stang, she peered at ghostly trees. Bus stopped, bus disappeared. 11 struck. You sighed. Well, I'm afraid there's nothing else of interest. You played network roulette. The dial turned and trucked. Commercials were beheaded, faces flicked, an open mouth in mid-song was struck out, an imbecile with sideburns was about to use his gun, but you were much too quick. A jovial Negro raised his trumpet, truck. Your ruby ring made life and laid the law. Oh, switch it off. And as life snapped, we saw a pinhead light dwindle and die in black infinity. Out of his lakeside shack, a watchman, Father Time, all gray and bent, emerged with his uneasy dog and went along the reedy bank. He came too late. You gently yawned and stacked away your plate. We heard the wind, we heard it rush and throw twigs at the window pane. Phone ringing. No. I helped you with the dishes. The tall clock kept on demolishing. Young root, old rock, young root, old rock. Midnight, you said. What's midnight to the young? And suddenly a festive blaze was flung across 5 cedar trunks. Snow patches showed, and a patrol car on our bumpy road came to a crunching stop. A retake, a retake. People have thought she tried to cross the lake at Lockenneck, where zesty skaters crossed from X to Y on days of special frost. Others suppose she might have lost her way by turning left from Bridge Road, and some say she took her poor young life. I know, you know. It was a night of thaw, a night of blow, with great excitement in the air. Black Spring stood just around the corner, shivering in the wet starlight and on the wet ground. The lake lay in the mist, its ice half drowned. A blurry shape stepped off the reedy bank into a crackling, gulping swamp and sank. I'd like to recite now a 10-minute poem entitled A Lecture on Russian Poetry. I wrote it exactly 20 years ago in the pretty guest room of a girls' college. I won't name the college. It was not Wellesley College. The epigraph is this passage from a letter addressed to the visiting speaker. 5:20 p.m. seems to be the best train, though it stops everywhere and is always full. Miss June Winter of the Department of English will meet you at this station. It is quite a long way. Now comes the speaker. The subject chosen for tonight's discussion is everywhere, though often incomplete. When their basaltic banks become too steep, most rivers use a kind of rapid rush, and so do children talking in their sleep. My little helper at the magic lantern, insert that slide and let the colored beam project my name or any such like phantom in Slavic characters upon the screen. The other way, the other way. I thank you. On mellow hills, the Greek, as you remember, fashioned his alphabet from cranes in flight. His arrows crossed the sunset, then the night, our simple skyline and a taste for timber, the influence of hives and conifers, reshaped the arrows and the borrowed birds. Yes, Sylvia? Why do you speak of words when all we want is knowledge nicely browned? Because all hangs together, shape and sound, heather and honey, vessel and content. Not only rainbows, every line is bent, and skulls and seeds, and all good worlds are round, like Russian verse, like our colossal vowels, those painted eggs, those glossy pitcher flowers that swallow whole a golden bumblebee, those shells that hold a thimble and the sea. Next question. Is your prosody like ours? Well, Emmy, our pentameter may seem to foreign ears as if it could not rouse the limp iambus from its pyrrhic dream, but close your eyes and listen to the line. The melody unwinds, the middle word is marvelously long and serpentine. You hear one beat, but you have also heard the shadow of another. Then the third touches the gong, and then the fourth one sighs. It makes a very fascinating noise. It opens slowly like a grayish rose in pedagogic films of long ago. The rhyme is the line's birthday, as you know, and there are certain customary twins in Russian as in other tongues. For instance, love automatically rhymes with blood, nature with liberty, sadness with distance, humane with everlasting, prince with mud, moon with a multitude of words, but sun and song and wind and life and death with none. Beyond the seas, where I have lost a scepter, I hear the neighing of my dappled nouns, soft participles coming down the steps, treading on leaves, trailing their rustling gowns, and liquid verbs in Allah and in Ili, Aeonian grottos, nights in the Altai, black pools of sound with elves for water lilies. The empty glass I touched is tinkling still, but now 'tis covered by a hand and dies. Trees, animals, your favorite precious stone, the birch tree, Cynthia, the fir tree, Joan, like a small caterpillar on its thread. My heart keeps dangling from a leaf long dead, but hanging still. And still I see this slender white birch that stands on tiptoe in the wind, and firs beginning where the garden ends, the evening ember glowing through their cinders. Among the animals that haunt our verse, that bird of bards, regale of night, comes first. Scores of locutions, mimicking its throat, render its every whistling, bubbling, bursting, flute-light or cuckoo-light or ghost-light note, but lapidary epithets are few. We do not deal in universal rubies. The angle and the glitter are subdued. Our riches lie concealed. We never light the jeweler's window in the rainy night. My back is Argus-eyed. I live in danger. False shadows turn to track me as I pass, and wearing beards, disguised as secret agents, creep in to blot the freshly written page and read the blotter in the looking glass. And in the dark, under my bedroom window, until with a chill whir and shiver, day presses its starter, warily they linger, or silently approach the door and ring the bell of memory and run away. Let me allude, before the spell is broken, to Pushkin, rocking in his coach on long and lonely roads. He dozed, then he awoke, undid the collar of his traveling cloak, and yawned and listened to the driver's song. Amorphous sallow bushes called rakiti, enormous clouds above an endless plain, songline and skyline endlessly repeated, the smell of grass and leather in the rain, and then the sob, the syncope Nekrasov, the panting syllables that climb and climb, obsessively repetitive and rasping, dearer to some than any other rhyme, and lovers meeting in a tangled garden, dreaming of mankind, of untrammeled life, mingling their longings in the moonlit garden where trees and hearts are larger than in life. This passion for expansion you may follow throughout our poetry. We want the mold to be a lynx or turn into a swallow by some sublime mutation of the soul, but to unneeded symbols consecrated, escorted by a vaguely infantile path for bare feet, our roads were always fated to lead into the silence of exile. Had I more time tonight, I would unfold the whole amazing story in New Clusia, in Ivanassima, but I have to go. What did I say under my breath? I spoke to a blind songbird, hidden in a hat, safe from my thumbs and from the eggs I broke into the gibus brimming with their yolk. And I must remind you, in conclusion, that I am followed everywhere, and that space is collapsible, although the bounty of memory is often incomplete. Once in a dusty place in Mora County, half town, half desert, dump mound and mesquite, and once in West Virginia, a muddy red road between an orchard and a veil of tepid rain. It came, that sudden shudder, a Russian something that I could inhale but could not see. Some rapid words were uttered, and then the child slept on. The door was shut. The conjurer collects his poor belongings, the colored handkerchief, the magic rope, the double-bottomed rhymes, the cage, the song. You tell him of the passes you detected. The mystery remains intact. The check comes forward in its smiling envelope. How would you say delightful talk in Russian? How would you say good night? Oh, that would be бессонница, твой взор уныл и страшен. Любовь моя, отступника прости. Insomnia, your stare is dull and ashen. My love, forgive me this apostasy. Let me now read my last poem of tonight, which is a short little thing written by Humbert, one of our favorite characters. And it comes from the novel Lolita, and it was written after Lolita's disappearance. Wanted, wanted, Dolores Hayes, hair brown, lips scarlet, age 5,300 days, profession none or starlet. Where are you hiding, Dolores Hayes? Why are you hiding, darling? I talk in a daze, I walk in a maze. I cannot get out, said the starling. Where are you riding, Dolores Hayes? What make is the magic carpet? Is a cream cougar the present craze? And where are you parked, my carpet? Who is your hero, Dolores Hayes? Still one of those blue-caped starmen? Oh, the balmy days and the palmy bays and the cars and the bars, my Carmen. Oh, Dolores, that jukebox hurts. Are you still dancing, darling? Both in worn Levi's, both in torn T-shirts, and I in my corner snarling. Happy, happy is gnarled MacFate, touring the states with a child wife, ploughing his molly in every state among the protected wildlife. My dolly, my folly, her eyes were there and never closed when I kissed her. Do you know an old perfume called Soleil Vert? Are you from Paris, mister? L'autre soir, un air froid d'opéra Lolita, son fêlé bien follet qui s'y fit. Il neige, le décor s'écroule, Lolita, Lolita, qu'ai-je fait de ta vie? Dying, dying, Lolita Hayes, of hate and remorse I'm dying, and again my hairy fist I raise, and again I hear you crying. Officer, officer, there they go, in the rain where the lighted store is, and her socks are white, and I love her so, and her name is Hayes, Dolores. Officer, officer, there they are, Dolores Hayes and her lover. Whip out your gun and follow that car. Now tumble out and take cover. Wanted, wanted, Dolores Hayes, her dream grey gaze never flinches. 90 pounds is all she weighs, with a height of 60 inches. My car is a limping Lolita Hayes, and the last long lap is the hardest, and I shall be dumped where the weed decays, and the rest is rust and stardust. if I can find it, because I didn't think I would read it. I think it's somewhere here. It should be in this book somewhere. Somewhere, here it is. It is called Rain. How mobile is the bed on these nights of gesticulating trees, when the rain clatters fast, the tin-toy rain with dapper hoof, trotting upon an endless roof, traveling into the past. Upon old roads the steeds of rain slip and slow down and speed again through many tangled year, but they can never reach the last dip at the bottom of the past, because the sun is there. Very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. 92nd Street Y, Unterberg Poetry Center webcasts, and access to our archive are made possible by the generous support of listeners like you. For more information on 92nd Street Y and all our programs, please visit us on the web at 92y.org. This program is copyright 1964 by 92nd Street Y.